Have you ever been caught in a certain BPM range while you're mixing? Well, I know I have, so let's talk about that right now. This is Share the Knowledge. This is the Share the Knowledge podcast for DJs. All right, so for this next question, we're going to stick with BPM for a second, and this question is all about getting stuck in a certain BPM range. So basically the question from this DJ is, a lot of times when I'm playing nowadays, I feel as if I'm trapped, caught within the BPM, and that the tempo dictates what kind of records I play next. Is there any way that you can kind of break this cycle? So here's the thing. When I started to play digitally, that was basically the first time that I was introduced to playing according to BPM. Now, what I mean by that is, before that time, I was just using my vinyl. I was beat matching, so I was definitely using the tempo, making sure tracks were playing in sync. But I would never grab a track out of my crates because I knew the BPM. I didn't. Now, in that time, you had DJs that actually would have the BPM written on all of their record sleeves, and I never really understood why they did that until I started to use BPM when I started to play digitally. So for me, when I was using vinyl, it was just all about knowing or feeling which track I wanted to grab next. I would grab that, and on certain occasions, I would grab a track, put it on, cue it, and just hear like, oh, in my mind, it was a different tempo. Now that I'm hearing it, it's not going to match with the other track at all because it is a totally different rhythm and BPM range. Now, what I discovered when I started to play digitally is that I could also sort my tracks, not just by name, but also by BPM. And that actually introduced me to another way of mixing, because if you use the BPM, you're seeing a whole bunch of tracks that will fall in that same BPM range, which basically shows you tracks that are quote unquote easier to mix. You still have to beat match, so it's not like it's gonna do it by itself, but you at least know that they're gonna fit tempo-wise. Doesn't mean that they're gonna fit vibe-wise or anything like that. Sonically, so if you're using key, that's a totally different thing, but BPM-wise, you're gonna be safe. So a lot of times I'll have my crates, even now in Serato, I'll have them lined up according to BPM. Now, what does happen, I understand what you're talking about, is if you're kind of trapped in that tempo range, you can get stuck and forget about totally different tempo ranges, or it feels as if you would go to a different type of tempo, that would totally mess up the vibe, and you'd rather just play safe and stay within that zone. So in a way, it can affect your creativity. Like I said, when I was playing with vinyl, it was all about the feeling. I would just play a track, and once I throw that track in, I get a feeling like, okay, I'm gonna grab this next. So I wasn't stuck looking at the BPM range and seeing tracks within that range, because that is the thing. If you do that, you're always gonna see the same type of tracks around the track that you're playing, because you're playing using your BPM. Now, ways to break that. One, I don't know if you're playing digitally, but what you could do, and I would definitely practice at home first if you've been using BPM for a long time, is not to sort your tracks by BPM, but just sort your tracks by name. That's gonna make it a little more difficult, challenge you, because now you have to make sure that you actually know the music that is in your library, or at least that's in that folder. So if you see titles, you in your head at least have to have an idea of how the track sounds and what kind of tempo it is, and if it would actually match. Now, you're gonna load that track and find out if it's in the same BPM range or not. If it is, you can mix it. If not, you can't mix it. That does not mean that you can't play it after the other track. And that's a very important thing that I like to mention more often, and that is you don't have to mix everything. So if you're playing in a certain range right now and you're at a 128, and all the tracks you're playing are 128, 126, 130, all in that same range, you can go to a track that's a totally different tempo. You just don't try to mix it. So if I want to go from 128 to 95, I'm not gonna beat match. I'm gonna just drop that track on the one, probably before I bring it in. I will echo out the other track or just stop it, grab the mic, do something, let the crowd sing along to something, then bring in the new track. But that alone allows me to switch to a totally different tempo. So besides being stuck within BPM, a more important thing is that a lot of you get stuck into feeling you have to mix everything. Once you start to approach your folders, crates, just your collection, and when you do a set, you're not thinking about that you have to actually beat match and mix every track. It gives you a little more freedom. It opens up the door for new possibilities. So I hope you understand what I mean by that, because that truly can help you out. So don't be afraid to put your tracks in a different order. Practice at home with that. See if you actually know your music, because if you know your music, you're gonna be fine. And just know that you do not have to mix everything. That might free up your mind as well to try new things. Thanks for tuning in to one of my video clips from the Share the Knowledge podcast for DJs. If you want to check out the full episode, make sure you check the links in the description box down below to check me out on SoundCloud, Anchor, Apple, Google Podcast, Stitcher, you name it. If you want to ask a question for a future episode, you can do that here in the comment section, or check me out on Instagram. Every week I drop a topic where I'm asking for questions for a future episode of the podcast. So jump in there as well. If you're new to my YouTube channel, I do all sorts of DJ related tips and tricks, tutorial, Q&A videos. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Check out djTLM.com, and I'll be back soon with more videos, more podcasts, more good stuff. Peace.